My guest at this time is Gordon Chang. He's an expert on East Asian policy and the author of both Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World, and The Coming Collapse of China. We want to get his thoughts today as 1 million protesters take to the streets of Hong Kong in protest of what the government there is doing, essentially at the bidding of the communist regime in Beijing. And Gordon, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Well, we originally scheduled this interview to discuss the trade tensions, and we'll get to that discussion, but I want to start by getting your insights on what we're seeing in the streets of Hong Kong right now. Unfortunately, our media is more focused on things like whether our women's soccer team is celebrating goals appropriately, so the news of this unrest comes as a complete surprise and a new story to just about everybody in this country. And 1 million people in Hong Kong are in the streets protesting a proposed extradition policy. So what exactly is being proposed there, and why are the people so upset about it?
The Hong Kong government, at the prodding of Beijing, has proposed an extradition bill, which would allow China to take people off the streets of Hong Kong, in effect. Hong Kong right now has extradition agreements with 20 nations, not including China. The extradition bill would broaden that, and that would give Beijing the ability really to bring Hong Kong to heel. As Hong Kong Democrats say, this is the last stand of the city. On Sunday, 1 million people came out onto the streets to protest. It was peaceful. But today, Wednesday, there was a protest around the Legislative Council building. It turned nasty, and Hong Kong has called it a quote-unquote riot, which would bring sentences of up to 10 years for people convicted. The government is intent on pushing through this bill, and so people have basically decided that the only way to stop it is to prevent the legislature from meeting, and that's what happened today.
Why do leaders in Hong Kong want to push this through?
Well, I think it's because people in Beijing, including Xi Jinping, the ruler of the country, want to push it through. This would really mean that Hong Kong would no longer be a refuge, for instance, dissidents. But because of extradition, this issue has really brought out the business community because they're worried that rapacious Chinese business people would use the extradition bill to intimidate their foreign partners. And so if this bill goes through, many people are saying that foreign businesses will leave Hong Kong because they will no longer see it as a place where they can get rule of law, which is absolutely essential for modern business.
Yeah, how will Hong Kong look different then years from now, or even not that long from now, if this ultimately becomes just another place where Beijing has its thumb over just about everything?
Well, it will look like, as the phrase goes, just another Chinese city. It won't be vibrant. It'll be just the same as Shanghai, only smaller.
So because of the protests on Wednesday, you mentioned the ones on Sunday were peaceful, and the ones on Wednesday faced more resistance from Chinese authorities. There are some comparisons out there that this is leading to a replay of Tiananmen, and obviously we haven't seen anything in terms of the numbers related to that. We just saw the anniversary, unfortunately, of 30 years since Tiananmen Square last week. But what do you make of the resistance that the authorities put up to these protests?
Yeah, the real issue, as you point out, is what happens if China decides to take its garrison of the People's Liberation Army in Hong Kong and use it to reinforce the Hong Kong police. Now, since the handover of Hong Kong from Britain to China in 1997, that garrison has stayed in the barracks, has been virtually invisible to the people in Hong Kong, except on occasions where you have celebrations and they open up the barracks and big picnic-like festivals. But clearly there's a concern because everyone is seeing this as the last fight. And so there's just obvious concern that China will do what it did in 1989, and that is try to teach people the lesson that the Communist Party is willing to kill to stay in power.
How did the current leaders in Hong Kong get in power? Were they placed there? Were they elected and then over time kind of gravitated towards the views of Beijing? How did they have like-minded people in power there?
Yeah, the government structure in Hong Kong is part of the Sino-British Joint Declaration of 1984, which was incorporated into the Basic Law, which is the so-called mini-constitution of Hong Kong, which is actually a law of the People's Republic. And so from the very beginning, the chief executive of Hong Kong, which is the top political officer, has been someone whom Beijing has essentially picked. And Carrie Lam, who is the fourth and current chief executive, is very much in the Beijing camp. And this was largely with the acquiescence of Hong Kong's business community. But now you're starting to see business have second thoughts about all of this. And clearly it's roiling and dividing Hong Kong society in a way that we have not seen in the past. And that's why people are concerned that there will be the use of force by Beijing. Beijing hasn't said it's going to do that, but nonetheless, that's been in the back of people's minds.
Gordon, China, as many people know who have been paying attention, is literally watching just about everything that anyone does all day long on cameras as part of the social credit system there. So what hope is there for a meaningful, successful resistance movement to build before the authorities just come around and crush it?
Well, the Chinese people are interesting. You know, they've been intimidated, of course, because of what you mentioned. It's the world's most successful surveillance state. They've got a social credit system which they will put in place, they hope, by next year, which will be nationwide, giving everyone a currently updated score. Next year, they plan to have 626 million surveillance cameras in place. But these systems, they can survive for quite some time, but then they break because people become desperate or they gain hope or whatever. And no matter how big the surveillance state is, it can't overwhelm 1.4 billion people. And that is the real fear of Xi Jinping. And as we're seeing right now, the big issue is going to be the economy, because you got a generation of Chinese people who don't know what a recession is. It's just completely outside of their level of comprehension, because every year has been better than the previous one. Well, now we're getting to the point where in China, they've got a softening economy, and this could be the first real downturn that they have had since the end of the Cultural Revolution. So Chinese leaders got to be very, very nervous about what's happening right now.
Gordon, we'll have to hold things there for the moment. Thanks very much for being with us. Gordon Chang, expert on East Asian policy and the author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World, as well as the Coming Collapse of China. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.